Welcome to the World Affairs Council of Greater Houston's Global Connections Conversation. I am Marianne Maldonado, CEO of the World Affairs Council here in Houston, and today my guest is the CEO of Holocaust Museum Houston, Dr. Kelly Zuniga. The World Affairs Council of Greater Houston is Houston's premier organization that has built a community of global learners and is open to all. The Council brings you bipartisan conversations with global thought leaders on subjects of international interest. And you can find a listing of all of our programs on our website at wachhouston.org. Now on to our program. As some of you here in Houston may know, Holocaust Museum Houston serves our community, and it is so great that we have it. And it helps us better understand the Holocaust and other genocides. And it teaches us the dangers of hatred, prejudice, apathy, and fosters greater diversity appreciation. Today, our conversation will focus on the lessons that we've learned from our past and the opportunities that each one of us have to counter global hatred. First, let me take a moment and introduce our guest. Dr. Kelly Zuniga serves as the CEO of the Holocaust Museum Houston, and she's responsible for all the museum operations. And she also serves as CEO for the Holocaust Museum Houston Foundation Board. She earned her doctorate of education from the University of Houston, a Master of Business Administration from the University of San Diego, and a Bachelor of Science in Finance from San Diego State University. She's a certified fundraising executive, we might call on you, and adjunct lecturer at Texas A&M University's Bush School of Government and Public Service. And she serves as an adjunct lecturer at the Rice University Center for Philanthropy and Nonprofit Leadership at the Suzanne M. Glasscock School of Continuing Studies. In addition to also serving as one of the board of directors of the World Affairs Council of Greater Houston, she was selected as one of the Houston Business Journal's 2019 Most Admired CEOs. Kelly, welcome to our program today.
Well, thank you. So nice to be here, Marianne.
I'm so glad that you've joined us, and I know we've been trying to make this happen for a little while now, so it's going to be an exciting conversation.
Absolutely. Well, and I wanted to thank you for your dedication and also let our viewers know that you have joined our board of advisors here at Holocaust Museum Houston. We're so happy to have you join us, and I am serving on the WAC advisory board. So it's kind of a nice pairing, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Our missions to educate are very, very similar, so it's a good synergy. And now I understand that Holocaust Museum Houston officially opened its doors in March of '96, which, if math serves me correctly, you are enjoying your 25th anniversary.
That's
Congratulations.
Right. Thank you.
And since those early years, the museum, I know, has transformed physically and internally, probably in so many ways. For those that are unfamiliar with the museum, can you tell us a little about its history?
Well, it's really quite fascinating history because the museum actually started at the late 80s from the standpoint of planning phase, centered around survivors. So our museum is pretty unique because our museum was started by the survivors within the Houston community. And it all began with a trip to Israel by Ziggy Isaacson. And Ziggy went to the very first survivor conference that was held in Israel. And at that conference, that was really the birthing of this concept of the importance of telling the stories of the Holocaust and having survivors speak out about their personal experience during the Holocaust. It really was never done before that. So Ziggy is very much, energized from this conference. He comes back to Houston and starts rallying the troops associated with the importance of having our own museum so that they have somewhere to tell those stories of the Holocaust. So the fundraising, the planning, all of that was done by the survivor community. And lo and behold, in as early as 1989, Martin Fine became the first chairman of that committee. And then they formed the actual Articles of Incorporation in 1991 for Holocaust Museum Houston, and then went on to actually open the museum on March 3rd, 1996. So a lot of dedication, a lot of energy from pretty much a volunteer group of survivors to make this possible.
Well, that brings me to the question, how many survivors are currently still in our region?
Well, we have within our directory, we refer to it as people that actually came to the museum and said, I'd like to be registered here and be involved with the museum. We have about 987 survivors that over since 1996 have done that. But I would say that less than 100, maybe about 75 of those survivors, are alive today. So we lose more and more every year. But what's really, again, another unique aspect of our museum is that they really emphasize the importance of telling their stories in the museum. And so a huge investment of time and money went into oral testimony work in the 90s. And so they captured a majority of these stories from survivors. And then that is the way we educate our visitors, is through the actual voice of the survivor, which is very, very unique when you go out and compare our museum to other museums.
We're going to talk a little bit more about these exciting programs. It's just phenomenal that all the work that you do. But when we use the term Holocaust, which means destruction or sacrifice by fire, and when we refer to the Holocaust, we're referring to, specifically the systematic state-sponsored persecution and murder of 6 million Jews. Could you speak to this terminology, why it's important, particularly in the Jewish diaspora, and in the better understanding of the overall impact of the Holocaust?
Well, it is a distinct event. There has never been any replication of such a horrific event. It was a really good definition, by the way, of how you described it, because it was, as you stated, a systematic state-sponsored persecution towards the elimination of a particular group of people, which of course were Jews. So that is a very unique application, and it's never been replicated in that manner ever again. We hope, again, it won't, but it is unique because of that. And from the standpoint of the empowerment of propaganda and the impact of propaganda during that period of time, made it unique as well, because it was such a long time. So when we frame the discussion of the Holocaust, we start in from the time of 1933, when Hitler comes to power, and it goes all the way through to 1945. So that time frame is our discussion associated with the Holocaust and what was happening at that period of time.
So recent surveys by the ADL said that 54% of people had not even heard of the Holocaust. And those who had heard of it, 34% thought the details were maybe exaggerated. What do you think of these disturbing statistics and lack of knowledge or disbelief?
The sad aspect of this is a function of state educational platforms. So you have to understand is that we're really fortunate that we live in the state of Texas, where it is actually mandated now that at least 5 days of education about the Holocaust is mandatory for all grades. So it's age specific as far as what's appropriate, but it is mandated. So you have many states, and as a matter of fact, I was just looking just last week, I believe it's a total of 8 states that have mandated educational programs for the, over higher ed and going into lower and middle school. So by having that available, children have the ability to become educated about the Holocaust, and they have access to that. So what we're really interested in is not only making it very, very accessible as far as this information. Let's say that you don't have a platform in your school district in another state where it's not emphasized, but you can virtually come to our museum and obtain educational material very, very easily and free of charge. So again, it's all about access. It's all about getting the educational information in front of the students and making it a priority. And all as far as I'm concerned, all 50 states should have it mandated as far as the Holocaust education and a focal point towards that within their educational curriculum.
One of our members earlier had sent in this question, and it's a little bit farther down in my list of questions, but it applies to exactly what you were saying. Ray has asked, in the mini-series Holocaust, it was often shown in schools during those early years, and although it was criticized by some, including Survivor and some activists, it did lead to a major public debates on the Holocaust in West Germany. So I think his question now gears toward Schindler's List, of course, is more recent production. Do you think movies such as these are useful tools or resources, or what do they feel like? What do you feel like they promote?
Oh, I think it's also within the last 10 years. It's absolutely amazing the impact it makes. I mean, maybe sometimes all the information is painted in a not true light. Like, the boy in the yellow striped pajamas. There was a lot of myths within that movie as far as really what would have happened in that situation. But we look at it as the popularity of the subject matter has just exploded, not only from the standpoint of film, but in scholarly activity. So there's just, I'm sure you're very aware, there's a plethora of new text associated with the Holocaust in all different aspects of what occurred geographically, specific historical moments. And so the film really broadens people's education and awareness of this subject matter. So I'm all for it. It's really, really an important component. But you're right. It has been within the last 10 years, it has just exploded. Not a day goes by that I don't either receive a new text, learn about a new author, or a film. It's that popular.
As people get older and kind of more removed from the years of the Holocaust and World War II, around the world and here even in the U.S., is the history of the Holocaust being taught in schools as it was 30 or 40 years ago, similarly or differently?
Yeah.
Or
That's a great question because it's really different. The philosophy now is that a lot of the Holocaust and their exposure was actually traumatizing children. And so it has changed in its methodology, I think, more from the standpoint of pointing out through those lessons how to fight prejudice, much more towards looking at ways to be an upstander, looking at abilities for you to stand up for others that are being wronged, social justice focused. So yes, that's really changed quite a bit. And also I would say just the way the material is presented and what they're specifically learning about.
whether it's in person or virtual, I'm interested in the students that come to the museum. Do they find it hard to process something that happened 70 years ago? And do you feel like they really relate?
Well, that's again so fascinating is that when students come, and thank goodness we do have survivors. I mean, yes, from the standpoint that we do have their video and they can listen to them directly. We even have Bill Morgan on this incredible technology that's where he is literally replicated on screen. It's called New Dimension and Testimony. And Bill is there, and he has answered 1,200 questions. And so the students can come up and ask him a question, and then the computer connects the right answer to that question. So they feel that they're actually speaking to a live person on the screen. It's pretty phenomenal. But we have all of those, but there's nothing to me that really replaces a live person. And so their ability to connect with a live survivor, ask them questions, listen to them in person, I think the students never forget that. I I think meeting a survivor is just one of those moments in your life that you rarely would forget. And so yes, they have an incredible impact on students when they're here. It's made to be relevant to them and their situations. I think survivors are really great at that, and it's just a very meaningful experience. So I personally have witnessed it that when students come in person, they are very much changed after their tour of the museum. Absolutely.
Are they, do you see them relating it to situations in today's world?
Yes, I'll give you a fascinating example is that, we have a German rail car that was utilized during the Holocaust, of that same model. We don't have proof that it actually carried Jews to the concentration camps, but it was the exact model that was utilized. So you have the ability to walk through the actual rail car and you can stop with a docent and you're actually inside the rail car and they discuss what occurred and how horrible the conditions were. There was no water, the fact that they were locked up for an average of 3 days with no toilet facilities. People, usually a third of the people died in that captive environment before they reached their destination. So a real impactful, obviously, real experience from the standpoint that you're in this space. And I had a student that was obviously from Central America and walked through and was in the car. And then when he walked out of the car, he turned to me and he said, I understand that. I've done that. And it's just, really kind of took my breath away because, this student had obviously traveled for thousands of miles escaping his own persecution to come to the United States for safety. And so you just never know what reference point students have or visitors have when they have this exposure to our various artifacts or um, you know, the rescue boat or any significant aspect of an artifact within the museum. So,
So the council is all about appreciating diversity, embracing opportunities to learn about other cultures in a positive environment. But with so many acts of hatred and prejudice kind of highlighting the news today, what are some of the current exhibits and programs that are focused on responsible civility and social justice?
we're really excited to open. It was just last week. We opened with Stan, which is Latinx art in times of conflict. So that was an open call to Latinx artists within Houston. We asked for a minimum of 200 submissions. We did get 200 submissions, and then we chose 80 submissions for the show. So they're all artists from Houston. But that is amazing because in this exhibition, we are exploring themes of social justice and human rights through the artworks. And also, there's multimedia platforms within the exhibition. But what's really great is that it opens up dialogue to difficult questions and empowers social change in the long run. So it causes you to really think about what the artist is talking about on various social justice issues and really make you ponder about the questions that they're presenting in front of you. So yes, that's we're really proud. We've never had a Latinx exhibition here before, and it's quite moving, very, very popular. So I encourage everyone to come by and see it. Another example before this exhibition was the Mandela exhibition that we hosted. We were the first in the United States to host that. And that was obviously the history of apartheid and the history of Mandela himself. And there were so many parallels associated with the Holocaust and lessons and techniques that they were using to dehumanize individuals in South Africa. So the parallels there were so strong. And then also seeing what occurred through Mandela's leadership from the standpoint of reconciliation and the importance of acceptance and such amazing work that he did throughout his time as president in South Africa. So lots of great lessons that we can teach through utilization of the topic of human rights, but always tying it back to the Holocaust and those lessons that we learned.
So I know also you focus upon issues of extremism and genocide in various parts of the world. The World Affairs Council is interested to learn about what is occurring in the world. Can you talk about some of the broader activities or goals that the museum might embark upon maybe in the future, or you hope to impart?
Sure. Well, I think, we did move into our new building in 2019 and until we had to close on March 18th. But then we reopened on May 27th. So really we're at about a year and a half mark for our new building. And one of the key components of this new building is the fact that we did add a permanent gallery in human rights as well as genocide. So we do a lot of work in genocide education. We highlight exhibitions associated with genocidal work and learning mechanisms for students on how to, fight against genocide. So that is been a big focus for us. It's a big shift to include the human rights and also outreach to various communities within Houston. So what you'll see is a lot more activity targeting specific groups of individuals here in Houston that have their own story to tell, their unique story to tell. So, for example, at the end of the year, we are going to be curating an exhibition on hate speech. And obviously, the focus towards the Asian American community has been quite intense recently, but the importance of the impact of hate speech, how it impacts our communities, and how to fight it. And there'll be a specific focus on the Asian community. Along with that exhibition, we'll be hosting a 2-day conference with leadership within Houston associated with the Asian American community. And that's like very, very broad swath, a lot of different leaders that we're connecting so that more groups can unite and get to know each other and benefit each other through education. So just a lot of exciting new programming that is coming our way.
Related to that new program, we're all concerned about the rise of extremism and nationalism, both in the U.S., around the world. What are the best ways maybe you have found through your experience with the museum that we can work together to counter these threats?
Well, I think especially through both our organizations, it all comes down to education and having a really strong anti-Semitism platform against hate, but focusing on that in our educational initiatives that, you got to realize that we have probably next year we'll have in the range of 85 to 90,000 school children come through. So that's a lot of teachers that we work with throughout 40 plus districts within our region. So we're really pleased about that, but also we want to educate adults as well. And so our programming is associated with that, our books that we have offered, our library resources, and so forth. So to us, we will never stop educating in this topic material and also to speak out. If you ever go to our website, at specific times based on specific events that are happening currently, we always try to make a statement. We try to create a position statement to, again, reinforce the importance of fighting hatred.
Looking back at these past 25 years, where do you think we are today in terms of understanding the Holocaust and countering anti Semitism, racism, and hate?
I think we have a long way to go. I think from the standpoint of just exposure and the media, social media increasing over the last 10 years, that whole explosion of uncensored, you know, speech being so easily read in any type of capacity has just changed the platform. So from the standpoint of like Facebook, that the claims conference put together a huge lobbying effort against Facebook for why? Because they wanted to eliminate deniers being publicized and published on Facebook. They were successful. They were successful in that area. It took a long time. It did not happen overnight, but this is at least a 5-year effort and they were successful. I was so proud of that effort because it was led by survivors, where every single day they would send testimony about the importance of removing this type of speech from Facebook, and they would send that to Zuckerberg every single day. And so ultimately they were successful. So it's like things like that where we work together and we do not falter. We continue with that voice. We continue with that message so that those voices, can be skirted and eliminated. It's really, really important component. But like you were saying, you asked me about the field. The field is changing all the time. It's actually fascinating for me that I learn something almost every day that is new, from scholarly research to really understanding why they did something, the Germans in a concentration camp. What were the thoughts processes behind what they did, propaganda information. So we're just constantly learning more and more about the Holocaust, and also throughout East Germany, because those records have really only been available to us within like a 4-year period. So there'll be even more scholarly opportunities that throughout Eastern Europe and of course Russia that will come as time progresses.
I'm glad you touched on the internet. It truly is a tool for learning and education, but unfortunately, it can be a tool for spreading hate, especially through social media. And it's important that we continue to share our positive voices. I want to ask you about Charlottesville, Virginia, August 2017. As with many moments in history, it feels like we've moved on and forgotten about events of this, and sometimes we're reawakened to events of this kind. Shocking, disturbing for most of us. And even now it seems like an anomaly. But really, was it? How significant were the events of that week, and what did it tell us, and maybe what have we learned?
Well, I think any type of demonstration of hatred is very significant, and people were murdered. It was just a horrible, horrible example of how people that are not educated and how hatred can just take over their behavior in the worst form possible. So I think what is really surprising to a lot of people, and this is more from the insurrection, was how organized the groups are. And I think that in many ways, people within Holocaust museums, scholars, were a little naive as to how sophisticated these groups are and how they're organized, and how well organized they were from the standpoint of the insurrection, their propaganda associated with what went along with that. And so there has been a concerted effort to, really work towards the elimination of this type of information collectively within the Holocaust community, but also within the museums, so that people are aware, what do these symbols mean? Where do they come from? What what do they mean from the standpoint of towards Jews, towards minorities, and so forth, and just how you know, awful the hate is and the damage that it can do within a community. So that's part of our new exhibition, is just really looking at the history of hate speech, how it gets started, and then how do you fight it? How do you work against it? But yeah, that has been a big wake up call within the Holocaust education community.
The World Affairs Council here in Houston certainly supports that endeavor. I'm excited to go to that. That's going to be very, very interesting. And I know many of us are, since the vaccine rollout, we're getting out a little bit more. We're wanting to visit new places or old places. Before I ask this last question, how we get it, how we register for these programs and learn more, I want to ask one little quick snippet, because you have such a neat history and background with the museum. You've been with the museum for several years, and you've seen it in its transition. What have you learned? What sticks out in your mind over your tenure?
I think it's just tremendous from the standpoint of all the communities that have supported. This is really a Houston community museum. So yes, the Jewish community got it started, but what's so beautiful about this museum is that it's a part of the overreaching community of Houston, and everyone, this is your place. This is a safe place. This is where any group can come to discuss, their topics, their opinions, and that is, I think, a really beautiful thing that we have something like that here in Houston. And also from the standpoint that the voices of the survivors will continue after they're all gone, and it's because of this building, and the people that run it, and the volunteers and the docents that work hard every day to continue that message. So it really is everyone's place, and that's what's so beautiful about this museum.
So you're open to the public now. Tell us how we can register and attend some of these great exhibits.
Sure. So first of all, you should become a member. So then we won't bother you. It's only probably once a week. But we will send you program information and you'll know everything that's coming in the future and be involved. So that's a really easy way to know what's going on. But you can also go to hmh.org and you can register for any programs. And right now, all of our programs are still virtual, but in the fall, we'll be going back in person. And the museum is fully functional and open. We're at 75% occupancy, so we have lots of room. We have 57,000 square feet here, so I have a lot of room for people to come in. And we would just love to have you spend some time here. And probably the most important thing, and very unusual, is that anyone that is 18 or younger is free. And then over 18, it's $19 for adults. And we have a senior rate and military rate. So that's all. You can find that all on our website. But we really, the survivors back in 1996 did not want to have any type of barrier to entry to our museum. And so we have maintained that, and we are the only Holocaust museum in the United States that has that capability. So we're really proud of it.
You should be proud. Beautiful building, beautiful programs and exhibits. Such a legacy that you have, and you're leaving to our future. I want to thank you, Kelly. Thank you so much for coming on our program today.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. And again, hats off to you and all the great work you're doing. Thank you. I learned a lot at your program, so it's wonderful.
Well, good. And again, I want to thank our guest, Dr. Kelly Zuniga of the Holocaust Museum Houston, and invite all of you to join us to our feature program this month with Chelsea Clinton. And again, you can visit us on the web to register for any of our programs. Thank you for joining us today. I look forward to seeing you next time as the Council brings you global perspectives and local conversations.
Thank you, Marianne. Bye-bye.
Kelly. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.